Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. One of the organizers of the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa received a special award in Toronto last night. The Alberta government announced a new women's hub, providing more support when it comes to childcare and career advice for women. And a tent camp has been set up near the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen. BCN's Angela Stewart discusses how homelessness continues to be a huge issue in our city.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Freedom Convoy organizer Tamara Leach received the 2022 George Jonas Freedom Award in Toronto last night. Leach was presented with the award by John Carpe, president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. Tamara Leach, a key organizer of last February's Freedom Convoy protest that gridlocked Ottawa for weeks, remains on bail while awaiting trial. She faces a long list of charges including mischief, intimidation, and obstructing police. After spending 18 days in jail, she was released in March with a long list of conditions, including a ban from all social media and an order to not support anything related to the Freedom Convoy. A grassroots movement called Canadian COVID Care Alliance is hoping to launch what they call a national conversation about the impact the pandemic measures have had on Canadians. A citizens' hearing is coming up next Wednesday in Toronto, where we'll hear from an expert panel, lawmakers, and politicians. Sonia Anderson is one of the organizers of the citizens' hearing, and she joins us now from Barrie, Ontario. Sonia, what are you really hoping to accomplish with this national conversation?
Well, we're hoping to accomplish a few things. First and foremost, we wanted to give an opportunity for Canadians' voices to be heard. We receive a lot of mail, and things that we were hearing were conversations are not being had. There are people out there that have been largely impacted by these mandates and by different government policies, and they were feeling like their circle of friends, their family members, whether it's even their family doctors, were just not listening to them. So we wanted to give a voice to people and a platform where that could be held.
Now, you're asking people to join the event via live stream. How can people go about doing that?
You can either access it directly through the website, and that's citizenshearing.ca. And we will be live streaming over the 3 days, June 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And it will also be live streamed through the Canadian COVID Care Alliance network, as well as the groups that are co-organizing this event with us.
So, Sonia, why do you think it's still important to have this conversation even after so many of the restrictions and mandates have or will be lifted?
Because we really don't have any guarantees that they're not going to come back again. And truthfully, we're even hearing now from government officials saying, well, in the fall, and even with these travel restrictions that have been lifted, they've been suspended, so they haven't completely been dropped. So I think that's something that's really important for your audience members to realize, that many of the restrictions that were put in place in the past can come back at the whim of government officials, unless we do a better job of educating them as well as the population about what their rights are and what freedom looks like. And really, one of the most important messages that we want to bring forward with this is the fact that voices need to be heard, and that these policies that they used in the past created a lot of harm. And we want to make sure that those harms don't come back to haunt us down the road.
That was Sonia Anderson with the Canadian COVID Care Alliance joining us from Barrie, Ontario. Many of the most vulnerable here in Lethbridge have set up tent encampments outside of 2 downtown facilities because of the lack of city housing support. As BCN's Angela Stewart explains, this is putting a strain on the facilities, and some of the vulnerables say they would like to see more support from city officials.
It has worsened over the course of the last year or so.
Just a few belongings to call their own and no proper place to lay their head at night. Many of the city's most vulnerable can be seen in these encampments just outside of the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen and Alpha House.
Part of the issue is the more we take their belongings away, the more they have to seek other belongings. You need shelter.
It's been an issue for quite some time, and now the number of tents camped outside the facilities has only gotten bigger.
This bothers me to the nth degree to see people having to live almost like animals, and we don't do anything about it.
Ultimately, the size, the number of encampments that we're seeing outside the shelter, that's posing a safety risk, and that's why we're concerned.
These are all real people too. We're all real people. I find all the best people I've ever met are right here.
Many of the most vulnerable say with no resources available, such as a transitional housing option, a tent is the best option right now.
It's literally all they got for our homes. And I find Lethbridge is doing nothing, like nothing at all.
I made bad choices, and look where I ended up at.
Todd Stelter, who has been dealing with homelessness, says more needs to be done to offer supports to the ones that need it the most.
I don't know how much funding, but there has to be transparency too as well with the funding. We do need more cameras down here to get the community to see what's really happening here,
Alpha House says a transitional housing space was being funded as a response to COVID-19, but that isn't the case anymore.
From, multiple stakeholders that, there are funds or that the funds are coming or that, we do see that this is the solution, but ultimately what we need is, things to be greenlit.
It's really on those decision makers who choose not to do anything. It's not an issue of money. It's an issue of caring enough about people to make a difference in their lives.
In a statement to Bridge City News, the city says they are continuing to advocate for the resources we know our community needs in the areas of transitional housing, shelter space, and permanent housing. We are working to come up with collaborative solutions with key stakeholders so we can assist the most vulnerable members of our community. For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
An advocate from Lethbridge says he's finally brought forth his vision of what he thinks will help those who are battling addiction here in our city. Alvin Mills says recovery camps will be set up on the Blood Tribe on private land. Blackfoot members will have to be 4 days sober in order to be able to come in. They will stay at the camps for a week and listen to elders who will educate them more on traditional Blackfoot culture. Mills says these camps are a long time coming, and the first camp will begin on June 25th. There will be a staff of 8 people with a peer support-based approach.
Participants will be subject to opioid dependency urinalysis. They've gone through the fire. They've lived through the ones out here that are struggling. What they went through, you can't teach it. They've been through hardship.
The funding for the camps comes from the Canadian government. The City of Lethbridge will be administering the funds for the camps to the tune of $120,000. The money will help pay for the operational costs of keeping the camps going. Chances are most people wouldn't think twice about lithium batteries being a danger when charging them. Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services is warning about 2 fires connected with lithium batteries that were being charged and caught fire. Adam Satterley, a fire prevention officer with the city, has some tips on how to best protect yourself from getting burned.
When you're charging anything that has a lithium ion or lithium polymer battery, you want to put it on a surface that is non-combustible or that doesn't heat up very easily. Don't leave it on a bed or on a couch or anything like that that when heated it could actually catch fire pretty easy. If you find that you do experience a fire in it, try to unplug the source of the power immediately and just understand that battery is not necessarily stable right now. One of the things you might see coming from it is smoke, and that smoke will actually be white in color, and that smoke is quite toxic.
Satterley says to unplug the power and call 911 if this happens. He says there have been deaths in Vancouver attributed to lithium batteries catching fire. A lot of people have different ideas on how to cook a really good steak. With Father's Day coming up on Sunday, you might be thinking of making a meal for your papa. Katie Talkeruk, the owner of Wild Bros Meat and Cheese in Lethbridge, says there are multiple ways to cook a steak to make sure that Dad has the best cut of meat for a special day. She says it all begins with a healthy dash of salt up to 24 hours prior to cooking.
I would recommend putting it out on the counter just to bring the temperature up a little bit so you're not going from refrigerator directly to a hot surface. You want to get a nice char on the outside of the steak. So before you put it onto the grill, we would recommend patting your steak dry with a towel so that you don't have moisture making your meat soggy. I like to say about 8 minutes per side with a steak like this. Thermometers are always helpful too. So you can put an instant read thermometer into your steak, and you probably want to finish it off one level below what you're going for. So if you want medium rare, go to the temperature that's going to be rare, and then it's important that you rest your steak for about 5 to 15 minutes, and it'll bring up that temperature. It'll keep all of the juices within your steak, and then cut it from there.
Talk says to top off your creation, put a little bit of compound butter onto the steak to add in a little extra flavor. Sounds like a great idea. This week's rain in our region was a welcome sight for farmers. Producers have been dealing with a very dry season so far, but now thanks to the recent moisture, Dave Bishop with Alberta Wheat says their crops should be in fairly good shape for now.
It'll get us into July. It'll all depend if we get hot winds and hot weather. The longer it stays this temperature, which is kind of on the average to cool side, it lasts longer. It was a good soaking rain, so it wasn't in a downpour. It didn't all come in an hour. It came over like 2.5 days basically. So it's the kind of rain that we like to see, because it wasn't a downpour, so it didn't crust anything, it didn't push anything. We had a little bit of wind, but it wasn't enough to do anything serious. So we'll take the rain with the wind, because we really needed the rain.
Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early peek at our weather forecast. Jeanette, could our farmers and ranchers expect more potential rain soon here in southwestern Alberta?
Yeah, and in fact, it could arrive much sooner than expected. As early as this evening, we're looking at another 30% chance of showers, and then more periods of rain throughout the day on Saturday, with a risk of an afternoon thunderstorm on Saturday. Beautiful temperature, though. Look at that, 26 degrees. We're also looking at a UV index of 9 or very high for those periods when the sun shines through. As we get into Father's Day Sunday, we're looking at more rain. I'll get into those details, though, coming up later on in the show.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The Saskatchewan government is giving disaster aid for farmers who suffered huge losses from spring storms. The program is for producers who lost livestock in April but did not qualify under original disaster assistance. The province says it will help producers with more than $2 million in gross revenues. It will pay 95% of the market price for livestock killed in the April storms. The Alberta government announced that it is creating a new Women's Hub directory to help women in our province connect with 180 resources and services. The online directory will allow women to search for all of the supports offered by the government. It will include everything from career advice to childcare. Associate Minister of Status of Women, Whitney Isaac, says they will also continue to work with the nonprofit groups, including the YWCA, to help women in crisis.
We provide crisis shelter and affordable housing for women and children fleeing domestic violence. And in the past year, YW Calgary has provided supports for over 5,300 citizens. Still, we know more work lies ahead of us, and to truly support women and their families to thrive in a safe and equitable community. Mental health will continue to be a growing area of focus for us, and in addition to providing counseling to our clients, YW Calgary has leveraged its deep knowledge in mental health and counseling to develop an online revenue-generating product to enhance psychological safety and well-being among employees across all sectors in Calgary, our province, and beyond.
Isaac says the province is also looking into expanding the Sheriff King Home Crisis Shelter in Calgary by increasing capacity and by adding a new affordable housing facility on site. Edmonton lost its bid to host the World Cup in 2026 as FIFA announced Toronto and Vancouver as the only Canadian cities for the men's soccer tournament. FIFA says the expanded 48-team tourney will see games played in 16 cities across North America, but unfortunately not in our provincial capital. Edmonton Mayor Sohi said the city did everything it could to get matches played in Edmonton. But when the Alberta government announced funding for the city's bid earlier this year, it stated that Edmonton had to host at least 5 games, more than the bidding called for. BC Tourism and Sports Minister Melanie Mark says the government expects $1 billion to flow into the economy when Vancouver serves as host city for the FIFA World Cup. Vancouver-Toronto will be hosting 10 games. Mark says BC wants a maximum return for its investment of up to $260 million, which will include renovations to BC Place Stadium. Games will also be played across the United States and Mexico. A report into money laundering in British Columbia says lack of attention by police allowed billions of dollars into the financial system. This occurred while provincial politicians allegedly knew suspicious cash was circulating in Vancouver area casinos, but did not do enough to stop it.
For too long, money laundering has been kept on the sidelines for police, for law enforcement, for regulators, and for governments. Money laundering activity has been and remains to be poorly understood, even by some of the public bodies that need to address it. And money laundering has rarely been given priority. Too often, it has been largely ignored. It's time for that to change. My report puts forward 101 recommendations directed primarily to the provincial government and provincial agencies.
People responding to a Facebook post showed up to help clean up a flooded home in Red Lodge, Montana, after a massive flood hit Yellowstone National Park and surrounding areas. Officials say more than 100 homes were hit hard with flooding in Red Lodge.
It was my understanding that people were coming around knocking on doors, that there was a Carbon County alert. Well, I never got an alert. I know that none of my neighbors were alerted because we probably wouldn't have been here. I woke up to my 10-year-old screaming downstairs and jumped out of bed, and there's probably about 4 or 5 inches worth of water. And I grabbed her, grabbed my other daughter, got them upstairs. We realized that the other cat was down there, so I ran back downstairs, grabbed the other cat, and then realized that the water was flowing so quickly and rising so fast that I needed to get the breakers off. I knew that some of the other neighbors were going to need help, so I just put something on the Red Lodge Buzz, a Facebook group, and just said, hey, anybody that's willing to help, there's several neighbors around here that are going to need help pumping out their basements, or ripping stuff out, digging out, anything they possibly can. So I just put something out there for everybody here.
Good to see neighbors coming to help out. That's wonderful. You know, not a lot of rain here in our region lately. This weekend will feel a bit like a mixed bag, however. Summer-like conditions on Saturday, but more like spring, and some rain as we lead up to Father's Day. Full weather details are coming up. It felt a lot like summer today with lots of sunshine as we hit the mid-20s. Jeanette Rocher is in now with a full look at the weather picture. Jeanette, tomorrow may be the best time for barbecues since we may have a bit of a wet day on Father's Day Sunday?
Yeah, well, it really just depends, Hal, because there is the potential for intermittent showers throughout the weekend, including this evening. We're looking at another 30% chance of showers. Into Saturday, 30% chance of showers with a risk of an afternoon thunderstorm, high 26 degrees. Into Sunday, Father's Day, we're looking at another 30% chance of showers, only 18 degrees there. So it really is hard to plan for a weekend like this as to when we should have that Father's Day barbecue. Maybe plan something inside just in case. On Monday, looking at chance of showers, 18 the high, 22 on Tuesday under sunny skies. Could see some showers Tuesday evening as well. Into Wednesday, high of 22 with partly cloudy skies, and ending out the 7-day forecast on Thursday with a high of 23 degrees. So we're definitely seeing those high temperatures drop as that moisture comes in. The average high for this time of year, according to the almanac, is 23 degrees. Average low, 9 degrees. On this day back in 1988, we had our hottest day on record, which was 32 degrees. And it was a chilly 1 degree back in 2000. That's very cold for June. 5:23 is when the sun rose this morning. Our sun set this evening, 9:42 p.m., giving us 16 hours and 19 minutes of daylight as we're getting closer to that summer solstice, which is only 4 days away. That's the longest day of the year. On the west coast tomorrow, 17 degrees tomorrow. Victoria, partly cloudy skies, a bit windy in the Strait. Looking at chance of showers in Vancouver. In Edmonton, 21 tomorrow, 5 to 10 millimeters of rain expected. Expecting some risk of thunderstorm as well. Same thing for Calgary, 22 the high, showers and a risk of a thunderstorm. As we look to the rest of the prairies here, we're seeing very wet, rainy, and also windy conditions, but very warm. Look at those temperatures, 34 in both Saskatchewan and Regina. Both of those cities looking at 60% chance of showers, 30 to 50K winds. Winnipeg sitting at 26 degrees, looking at 30 to 50 and then 50 to 70 kilometer per hour winds. So the winds very strong in Winnipeg tomorrow. Toronto, 20, 15 in Ottawa, looking at showers also in Montreal tomorrow. With a high of 14 degrees. And both of those cities also looking at windy conditions, 30 to 50K. In Fredericton tomorrow, 22 the high, looking at 5 millimeters of rain, risk of a thunderstorm, chance of showers. In Halifax tomorrow, 23 the high, also the same thing there for Charlottetown, looking at showers there. 21 the high in St. John's, Newfoundland tomorrow with 30 to 50K winds there as well. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Air Canada and our country's two biggest railways have dropped COVID-19 vaccine mandates for their workers. The move comes amid loosening restrictions, with Ottawa dropping vaccine mandates for airline and railway workers and passengers beginning on Monday. Experts say the trend marks a response to shifts in provincial and federal rules, along with more comfort with shared indoor spaces. Canada's big banks and four largest accounting firms have also dropped requirements that employees be vaccinated as they return to the office. WestJet says it plans to refocus its routes and fleet on Western Canada. The Calgary-based airline says it will add more routes to more communities and center its wide-body 787 Dreamliner fleet around the region. The company also says its fleet of de Havilland turboprop aircraft will be shifted to focus more on Western Canada. The airline says it will continue to be a national airline with a large presence in Eastern Canada, but primarily through direct connections to Western Canadian cities. Automakers reported close to 400 crashes of vehicles with partially autonomous driver assist technology. U.S. safety regulators say that includes 273 Teslas.
They are not fully self-driving, they're not fully autonomous driving vehicles at all. So they're only meant to assist your driving. You, as the driver in control, must always be paying attention to the road ahead of you.
To be honest, man, I love it. I think the autonomous features of the Tesla are great, man. Especially for long road trips or for commuting, in and out of work or whatever the case may be. Yeah, man, I guess you could say I'm trusting it with my life. I guess you could call it that, but I trust the technology more than a lot of drivers, to be honest.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 73 points in the day to finish at 18,930. The Dow was down 38 points to 29,888. The S&P 500 was up 8 points to 3674, and the Nasdaq was up 152 on the day to 10,798. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 756 to 110.03 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 45 cents to 7.02 US. Gold was down 17.94 to 1839.39 US an ounce, and silver was down 28 cents to 21.67 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $14.64 per bushel, barley's at $9.91, canola's at $23.90, and corn is at $12.45 per bushel. Live cattle were up 28 cents to $138.03, feeder cattle were up $1.65 to $172.95, and lean hogs were up $1.43 to $111. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 76.77 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Freedom Convoy organizer Tamara Leach received the 2022 George Jonas Freedom Award in Toronto last night. Leach was presented with the award by John Carpe, president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. Tamara Leach, a key organizer of last February's Freedom Convoy protest that gridlocked Ottawa for weeks, remains on bail while awaiting trial. There's a group which teaches how grandparents can best interact with their grandchildren. Dr. Robert Peterson with Legacy Imperative will have details for us in just a moment.
Today's younger generation seems to have less and less desire to go to church and follow God than previous generations. Can something be done to change the way the pendulum is swinging? Today's guest thinks grandparents can make a significant difference. We are joined by Dr. Robert Peterson, a pastor and grandfather and president of the Legacy Imperative. Welcome to Bridge City News, Dr. Peterson.
Great to be with you.
So, first of all, can you tell us what the Legacy Imperative is all about?
Well, years ago, after I retired from my church, quote unquote, we don't believe in the word retired at Legacy Imperative. We tell grandparents you need to refire, not retire. We say if youth being wasted on the young is a tragedy, age being wasted on the old is a double tragedy. And we're telling people whether you're in the fourth quarter or sudden death overtime, it can be your most powerful and productive quarter in your life. Because though you may have less energy, you have more wisdom, time, resources, and especially the affection of your grandchildren. And so years ago, when I left the pastorate and I was becoming a best-selling author and writing a lot of books for Tyndale, and I was going to write a 5-generation study for how you could write a 5-generation story for your grandkids, I began to think about where we were going in America. Here's a few statistics. I don't know if it mirrors what's happening in Canada, but we found that less than 11% of the attenders in evangelical churches in America were under the age of 30. If the statistic continues, it'll be less than 5% within 10 years.
Wow.
On the flip side, more than 60% of the people attending evangelical churches are over the age of 50. And pastors are frustrated. They want to reach the next generation. They sometimes find that the older people in their church are a hindrance to doing that because they think that the answer is to change the services and to change the worship and so forth to appeal to young people. Often the older people, fight that. And so pastors are frustrated at what to do. And so as I thought about that, I discovered a statistic that's incredible. When asked, at least in America, people under 40, who are your favorite people on the face of the earth, 83% said our grandparents. We love our grandparents. Disney World, Anaheim, California, conducted a survey in America, and they asked millennials, those between the ages of 26 and 40, who would you rather go on vacation with, your peers, your parents, or your grandparents? 74% of millennials said they would rather go on vacation with their grandparents.
Wow.
Now, why would kids want to go on vacation with decidedly uncool older people? Well, first of all, of course, they pay for it. But more importantly, they said our peers put pressure on us to be cool. Our parents put pressure on us to be correct, but our grandparents just love us the way they are. They're our cheerleaders, and so they're more fun to hang out with.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. I always thought like it may have something to do with grandparents may have more limited time left on Earth, so the kids just want to spend more time with them and maximize their time with their grandparents.
No, actually, it's the opposite. It was William Durant, the great philosopher, who said we get our children as savages when they're born, and we have about 18 years to civilize the barbarian. And barbarians, he said, are not easily civilized. So the job of parents is not to be the friend, but to be your parent. They're your coach, they're your mentor, they discipline, they rebuke, they do everything they can to prepare you for life, which is an awesome responsibility. And that's why kids say the most important people in their life are their parents. But grandparents don't have that pressure. We really can be their friends. We are their cheerleaders, and we teach parents to do that. So what I noticed that there were 29 million evangelical grandparents, at least in America. And I thought if I could mobilize 10 million of these grandparents to become missionaries to that place we call Digital Land. In the United States, there are 174 million people under the age of 40. If separated out, they'd be the 8th largest nation in the world. And 152 million of them don't know Jesus as their Savior, making them one of the largest unreached people group in the world. So we developed a whole program where we could go into churches on a weekend and call people to action through our 10-session seminar. And then we have a follow-up training time, call it basic training, where we teach grandparents the 8 most basic things they have to do to build bridges to their kids, including how to listen, how to ask questions, how to tell your story, God's story, how to depend on the Holy Spirit, how to deal with hot button issues that separate the generations today. And then after that, we put them in sustaining groups so that they can intentionally commit themselves. We ordain them as missionaries to Digital Land. And so our goal is to have 5 million grandparents at the end of the next 10 years mobilized and intentionally reaching their grandkids for Jesus Christ.
Well, that's amazing. Now you're talking about Digital Land. You have a film series called Reaching Digital Land to equip grandparents to communicate with their grandkids. What kind of response are you getting so far from grandpas and grandmas?
We're getting an awesome response. We thought the law of tens, if we had, let's say, 300 or 400 people at a conference, that we might get 1 out of 10 that would take the follow-up training. What we're finding so far is that 40 to 50% of every church, people are signing up for the follow-up program because grandparents are worried about the next generation. I mean, in America, only 1 out of 5 high school kids has ever been to church in their lifetime. We are seeing changes at a dizzying rate. Changes that I suspect you would agree with me that we never thought we'd see 5-10 years ago. Gender, transgender, LGBTQ issues. I mean, the gap between the generations is just widening, and Christians don't know what to do. Pastors don't know what to do. How do we reach these kids? And I'm telling pastors everywhere, those kids won't come to your church, perhaps, but they'll go to grandma's house for Thanksgiving, for Christmas. And so what you do is you train your grandparents to reach your kids, the next generation, in their homes, in their family reunions, in fishing trips, in outings. And that's what we're going to reach the next generation.
Now, Dr. Robert, you said earlier that statistically only 1 in 5 of this younger generation are attending church. And of course, like many are just embracing more secular values. So isn't this a pretty tall order to change their hearts and minds?
Of course it is. But can I remind you that at the time of when Christ left this earth, there were 120 disparate people in an upper room in a back street in Jerusalem, mostly fisher folk, ex-prostitutes, ex-tax collectors, facing the might and the power and the religions of the Greco-Roman world. And yet Jesus used them to change the world. And at the time of before the American Revolution, there were less than 11% of the people went to church in the colonies. And there was a great spiritual awakening in the 1730s that changed everything. And we just believe that, one, if you're optimistic, you believe that God can still do the same thing he's always done in the past. He doesn't depend on numbers. He just depends on faithful, committed people who are ready to share the gospel with those they love most. And then, so we believe that. And if you have a pessimistic view and you think the book of Revelation is upon us, then you need to be involved in your kids' lives to prepare them to stand in the day to come. So either way, we're telling grandparents, when you stand before God, you're going to give an account. To whom much has been given, much will be required. Where are you going to give the biggest account for? The fourth quarter, because that's where you have the most resources. Grandparents are the most powerful force in the world today, and they still remember the story of faith, family, and the values. And so they should be sharing that with their next generation kids.
Now, there's a lot of grandpas and grandmas watching our newscast. Can you give us a sample of what kinds of topics the materials in the toolbox cover?
Yes, and by the way, they can go to legacyimperative.org and they can go online, they can subscribe, and pastors can do the same thing to learn about our seminars. We'd love to come to Canada. We've been invited to Russia, Ukraine. Obviously, there's a reason why we're not going to those two places right now, but we've been invited to South America. So because of the internet, because of social media, things that are happening in America are happening everywhere in the world today with the generational crisis. And so what I'm telling, and if they want to go on our YouTube channel, Legacy Imperative, we have a whole selection of talks on the hot button issues that are dividing us. LGBTQ issues. What do you do if your children are in the far country? How do you bring them home? What if your adult children are telling you can't share the gospel with your grandchildren? How do you deal with that? So we have a lot of really practical issues. We're all about the business of having a toolbox for grandparents to help them be effective in what they do.
As you mentioned, there's a lot of hot button issues out there. Do you have any tips on how to discuss these kinds of issues without starting an argument? Like, are there certain do's and don'ts?
Yes, one of the do's and don'ts is listen. Listen. And that's hard. You know, when I read the Bible, there were 3 times Jesus was asked questions. Only 3 times when he was asked a question did he give an answer. Every time he responded with another question. So we're telling older people, listen. Listen not only with your ears, but with your eyes and with your heart. And listen for the heart of your kids. So 1, listen. Number 2, ask questions. How does that work? How does that make you feel? Because and number 3, don't try to close the deal in the first conversation you have. This is a long-term process. And so if you'll spend the first 2 or 3 sessions just listening to your kids, asking questions, you don't have to affirm what they believe, but you have to affirm them. And you can affirm people without agreeing with people, without saying, I want to celebrate this with you. You can agree with them, or you can affirm them without agreeing with them. And so we're telling grandparents, listen, just listen. And love your kids unconditionally. And don't be shocked. You have to learn to not be shockable. If your grandkid says, I'm thinking about coming out of the, declaring gay, or I think I'm going to transgender, or I have an economic view, or a political view, or a social view, or I don't know if I believe in God anymore, to not be shockable, and to ask questions, and to listen.
And what kind of response have you been getting from the grandkids?
Oh my goodness, we're finding grandparents that are finding healing, and one of the areas what we're really finding too is that in America, over 5 million grandparents have been walled off from talking to their grandkids. In Ontario, 200,000 grandparents are not allowed to talk to their grandkids. And what we are discovering as we get deep into this, in 67% of the cases, it's the grandparents' fault. They're too critical of their kids. We tell them again and again, you had your chance to coach your kids. Now that they're adults, you're no longer their coaches, and you're certainly not the coaches of their grandkids. You're not to interfere with them. And we're finding in probably about 80% of the cases, it's the daughter-in-law who's upset at the mother-in-law. And so what we've seen grandparents literally go back to their adult children and say, let's talk about this. What have I done? Tell me, give me a report card. And they've had to repent and say they're sorry. And because what we've discovered is a lot of adult children they think they're protecting their own children from the disabling, the unappetizing kind of Christianity, the negative kind of Christianity they got growing up. And so they're protecting their kids. And so we've seen a lot of grandparents actually apologize to children. So what we're finding is a healing going on with grandparents and their adult children.
That's amazing. Now, the view of the modern family can often get complex. A common one, though, is kids growing up in fatherless homes. How much of a factor is the fact that many kids are growing up in fatherless homes, or is that even a factor?
It's a huge thing. In America, I keep speaking of America, and I should have been prepared with Canadian statistics, but I'm sure you mirror us to some extent. 24.7 million children in America go to bed at night in a home without their biological father.
Wow.
What that allows is for grandparents to have a disproportionate impact in the lives of their grandchildren. And parents are desperate, single moms are desperate to have their parents help and get involved in their lives.
Dr. Robert, can you explain what grandparents need to do to get involved in the mission of the Legacy Imperative?
Well, I would say, number one, go online, subscribe to Legacy Imperative website. It's a great website. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel with all of the hot button issues. There's a place where they can call us to ask for information. We'll have people call them and go to their pastor and say, we heard this guy. We really need to get a Legacy Imperative weekend conference at our church. I guarantee you, it'll be one of the most powerful experiences they ever have.
Dr. Robert Peterson is the president of the Legacy Imperative. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be with you. Thank you so much. God bless you guys.
Residential fires can be so devastating to families. Even if there are no injuries or fatalities, you could lose everything. But too often, they are deadly, and many of those fires are preventable. Joining us now to discuss fire prevention and safety is Troy Hicks. He's the Fire Prevention Officer with the City of Lethbridge Fire Department. Troy, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Now, Troy, there have been a number of fires here in Lethbridge over the past year. What has been the number one cause of these blazes? Is maybe people not properly disposing of their cigarettes?
Yeah, you know what, Hal? Every year, we usually run into the same types of fires. This year, though, 2022, and even last year, 2021, we have definitely seen an increase in improper disposal of smoking materials. I don't know, maybe because of COVID, so many more people were home and different things like this, working from home. But yeah, we have definitely seen an increase in smoking material fires.
So where are people actually disposing of their smokes? They're putting them in plant pots? Like, what are they doing with them?
Absolutely. We have everything from planters, or we've had issues with plastic buckets that the person thought there was water in. We've even had issues with people using a proper ashtray, but it's an ashtray that's meant for indoors, not outdoors, and they'll have it on their back patio. We all know the winds here in southern Alberta, and they go outside, they have their cigarette, they put it out, but it's not really out. And once they go back inside, the wind picks up, blows those embers around, and whether it's a lawn chair or anything like that, it catches it on fire.
Are there still incidents as well of people maybe smoking in bed, falling asleep with a cigarette in their hands?
In my time here, I haven't seen that type of fire in years. It's always been just improperly disposed of when they're putting them out.
Now, Troy, we also often see a lot of grass fires here in southwestern Alberta, especially when it's so dry. Are many of those fires caused by people maybe tossing their cigarette out the window?
Absolutely. We see it every day. I see it when I drive home, up down the coulees and stuff like that. I see it on the highway. I can't 100% say that every fire on the side of the highway is caused by that. We could have anything from sparks from maybe trucks with their brakes are locked on, or train tracks or something as well. But definitely a large percentage of them are from people throwing cigarettes out their window. So
how can you educate people more as to some of the causes of the fires and what we can do to prevent those fires, such as not throwing your cigarette out the window?
Absolutely. No, we will put out media releases. I actually put out a media release here in the city yesterday about planters, and just it's not meant to be. When it comes to the highways, we have other provinces here in Canada that there's actually fines. People can contact the police, take the license plate number down, and people are issued very hefty fines for throwing cigarettes and stuff outside their windows. It is something that's been discussed here in southern Alberta and in Lethbridge in particular. It's not in effect yet. I don't think it's a bad idea. We just need people to realize, unfortunately, we're a society of people that think, oh, it's not going to happen to me. And, I used to be one of those people too, until I started in this profession. And now, it does happen, and it happens a lot, and we can educate as much as we can. But the whole goal is eventually to try to maybe not completely get rid of these types of fires, but at the very least, lower the numbers and just continue to educate more people.
Speaking of education, Troy, how important is it really for parents to speak to young people and their kids about the dangers of using matches and lighters?
Oh, absolutely. We actually have had a couple fires already this year, just caused by curious children that, maybe a lighter was sitting on a table and mom and dad weren't watching, or the babysitter wasn't watching, and they're just like, oh, I seen dad play with this. Yesterday, I had a 12-year-old boy here in my office, and it's not that he's done something wrong. His mom was just concerned about, she didn't feel he respected being around a fire pit enough and the dangers of a fire pit. So I sat here and I talked to him for about a half hour, and he was a great young man. And I educated him. I showed him the fire trucks, and I think he left here maybe realized a bit more like, hey, you know what? This is important. I do need to be respectful for this kind of stuff.
Are there any statistics available as to how many families actually have a fire evacuation plan in place? And what are some of the key steps with an evacuation plan?
As for numbers here in the city, it's been a long time since we've been in the schools because of COVID, but I'm starting to get appointments booked, so we are getting back in to educate. I find that the numbers are quite high when I go to schools, particularly say from kindergarten till about grade 3 or 4. I'm happy with the numbers of people that tell me that, yes, they do have fire safety plans. When we do things like any public education event, like we're at the Home and Garden Expo this year, I did have some parents come up and say how nice it was to see us, and actually asked me if I could go over their plan with them. For anybody else that doesn't have one, or maybe someone that wants to do one, there's a few things you really need to hit. Make sure everyone in your house knows what to do when the smoke detector goes off. They have an escape plan. They need to, if their bedrooms are up on the second floor, they can either go down the stairs or whatever they have to do to get out. And they need to have a meeting place. Your meeting place should not be hopefully crossing a road just because of traffic. You want to be careful with that. And if you also have a fenced-in backyard, you don't really want your meeting place to be in the backyard, because now you're trapped back there if the fire gets out of control. But there is lots of things. People can contact me at the fire department, and I can definitely give them as much information as they like for their home safety plan.
In the past, when I've spoken to firefighters, they say when you go to bed at night with your bedroom door, always keep it closed. Can you explain why that's so important?
For sure. Even the normal bedroom doors, they're not necessarily what you would call a fire door, which what we see in apartment buildings and hotels and stuff. But even a normal bedroom door, fire needs oxygen in order to burn. In order to keep a fire burning, there has to be enough oxygen. Oxygen is even more important than the fuel. So by closing that door, you are mitigating the amount of oxygen that fire could have. So whether the fire starts in the room, it'll keep it in that room. But if you're in your room sleeping and the fire's out in the hallway or out in something like that, by you having that door closed, you're going to keep all flame, heat, and smoke from getting into your room for a significant amount of time. Therefore, if you can't make it outside, maybe the fire is directly outside your door. Well, you have time to stay in your room. Hopefully, if you have a phone, you can call 911 and let us know what room you're in. Or if you don't, you open up your window and you make sure your neighbors know where you are. And when we arrive to put that fire out, we are coming straight to your window to get you out of there.
And if you have an ensuite bath, I guess you can roll up a towel, a wet towel, throw it under the door to prevent a lot of the smoke from coming in, right?
Absolutely. Every little bit helps because, as we always say, every second matters, right? So,
now, Troy, when there's a fire and you have kids and your pets and you're ready to evacuate, what else should you really grab in a fire? Maybe some photo albums, special memories, or how about hockey card collections?
You know what, Hal? I was looking at your questions this morning, and I could definitely see where you're coming from. Rule of thumb, especially as far as the fire department's concerned, you get your family, you get out. We even educate people that one thing I will say, when a smoke detector goes off, as much as we don't like that sound, pets hate it even more. And chances are your pets are going to hide. If they're not right beside you to take them out as you're leaving, you need to leave. We don't recommend you go back in and get your pets. If you have a fire in your home and the fire department shows up and you and all your family members are outside, not calling the pets not being a family member, but you and your kids are outside, if you let us know that there's a pet inside, we're going inside that building just the same way we would if it was you or your child or anyone in the house, and we're going to try to save that pet.
Are there stickers that we can put on our windows saying, hey, there are pets inside of our home?
I have seen them around. There's a kennel here in Lethbridge that I take my dog on the south side. They have magnets and stickers around. I believe I've seen them at some of the other department stores and home hardware stores, things like that here in the city as well. So,
Troy, how common are kitchen fires? And are they fires tied in with a faulty appliance such as a stove or microwave, or maybe simply cooking that's gotten out of control, like when I usually cook?
Yeah, me as well. I keep telling myself that the smoke detector is not my timer. But when I first started here, Hal, 10 plus years ago, kitchen fires were our number one type. They were the number one type here in the city. Over the last few years, that has changed. We are a lot more into smoking fires, electrical fires, things like that. But the number one types of kitchen fires we receive is, say, people not paying attention when they're cooking, unattended, people leaving their kitchen, leaving their stove. I know we're a busy society. We're a technological society. We're always on our phones or computers or on TV or video games. We just need to remind people that when you're cooking, you need to remember you're cooking. And that's even in the kitchen and or outside of your barbecue. It needs to be attended. You need to be paying attention. We do sometimes have fires caused by old faulty appliances. 90% of the time with those, though, it turns into be an electrical fire, because a lot of times what it is it's the electrical cord or something like that that's just it's not covered, it's not doing well, it overheats, and that's what catches fire. And then the stove is actually a victim of the fire and not the cause.
How about some of the older, smaller appliances that we leave plugged in? Let's say maybe a toaster or even a hairdryer when we take off, go to work, and maybe go on holidays. Could they also maybe potentially cause a fire?
The risk is always there. I experienced a fire many, many years ago with a coffee pot. Just the power surged. It was a very older home. The power surged and the coffee pot actually caught on fire. Wasn't a lot of damage. Everyone was fine, but it did. Ever since then, the only thing that stays plugged in when I leave my home, other than just for work, but when I leave for any amount of time, the only thing that stays plugged in is my fridge or freezer. Unplug everything else. And that's not to make people nervous. We need to remind people, if your house is wired properly, we also remind people, use a proper CSA approved power bar that has surge protection. That will help you with that. But you know what? Why have stuff plugged in if you're not using it? So things like a coffee pot, toaster, I can tell you right now, mine at home are not plugged in. We have not had a lot of issues here in the city of Lethbridge, but even when it comes to phone chargers, if you're not charging your phone, unplug it. Don't leave it in. Anything that's plugged in, electricity produces heat, and it leaves that slight opportunity that something could happen. I mean, most electrical outlets don't just burst into flames, but it could come down to anything. There could be dust on it. There could be, maybe it's very close to curtains that may be like very thin curtains or shears that could be close to it, that radiant heat from the plug could catch them on fire. So I've always lived in the habit, and I have a 21-year-old son that I've taught him since he was very young as well. As far as I know, he still leaves everything unplugged as well.
So Troy, how much time do we typically have to evacuate a home before maybe flames or smoke overtake us?
You know what, that is a great question. When I was looking at your list, I thought that was fantastic. With the amount of materials and stuff used now to make new furniture, it's not exaggerating when we say every second counts. Years ago, even if we say as much as 10 to 15 years ago, by the time something ignited in your home, it took a few minutes before the smoke to get thick enough to set off the detector. And once that went off, you still had 5-6 minutes to get out. Nowadays, with new furniture and the amount of products and petroleum products that are in furniture, the smoke is so toxic, you need to get out as fast as you can. To put a number on it, I would say when your smoke detector goes off, you need to be out of that house within 2 minutes. And that's just really trying to train people and remind people that, you know what, treat it as real. That smoke detector goes off, you get out and you make your way out the door. So, you know, it's a good idea. Just make sure your exit doors are always clear. Don't have 50 pairs of shoes in front of your doors that's going to stop something. Don't try to search for different things like we spoke of earlier, photo albums and stuff like that. If you get out of that place properly and you close the door, you have your doors closed, there's a good chance that fire is not going to spread and not going to damage too much of your home. And I know it's heartless, and I've spoken to so many families that have had fires, and obviously they're in a horrible point of their day in their lives. And I just try to reiterate to them, say, you know what though, you're still here hugging your child, you're still alive. It's just stuff. It can be redone. And there's quite a few times actually that even after a structure fire, we can send some of our firefighters in. The homeowners have asked us to go in to look for passports or maybe an urn and some of that. And 9 times out of 10, we do find it. We bring it out and give it to them. So the biggest thing that we just want people to realize is you need to get out. As soon as you hear that smoke detector, teach your kids, teach everybody in the home that it's real. You need to get out, and the importance of making sure they work. Smoke detectors have expiry dates. They're only good for 10 years.
It seems like a lot of home builders these days are building more 2.5 story, even 3-story homes. Do you think we should maybe have a rope ladder available in some of those higher homes?
You know, I actually had a lady call me the other day and ask me that same question. And rope ladders are good. They are very good. And if you, the family member that you're going to put that rope ladder in, if you feel safe and trusting that they can use that ladder, then fantastic. I agree with that. That's okay. The biggest thing to remember with those rope ladders, though, is they are rated for a certain weight, and they're actually used once and they're no good anymore. So if you have one of those in, you can't train with it, you can't practice with it. It's just you have to be able to use it. So lots of times what I tell people is we don't want people breaking windows, jumping out of windows, things like that. If you're on your second floor or even your third floor and you hear your smoke detector go off, it's just like we were all told when we were kids, and I teach the young kids at school now, you know, you touch the door with the back of your hand because hopefully you're sleeping with your door closed. If it's not too hot, you open it. If you open it and there's just smoke in front of you, take a t-shirt, something, cover your mouth, get down nice and low, crawl down the stairs, go down on your belly, on your butt, whatever you have to do, and you need to be able to get out. If you open that door and there's flames in front of you, like I said earlier, that's when you just close the door. If you have a towel or a sweater or something you can jam on the bottom, do that. Either call 911 or open your window and start yelling so people know where you are, and that's the first place we're going.
Now, every spring and fall, when we have a time change, we're always reminded to check the batteries and our smoke detectors here. What about carbon monoxide detectors? Should we have one on every level of our home, Troy?
You know what? It's definitely not. It's such case dependent on that. Like I have a carbon monoxide detector in my home, and I have it in my basement. I have it outside my furnace room, my laundry room, things like that. I always tell people that if they have something, like, you need to think of the different areas in your home where you could possibly get carbon monoxide. So, you know, like if you're where you have your furnace room, where you have things like that, you can have it down there. If you have a natural gas fireplace or anything like that in your home, or even a wood burning fireplace, definitely a good idea to have one on that level. I also tell people that have an attached garage, it's a good idea to have a carbon monoxide detector just outside the door that goes into their attached garage. We all, like I said, we're all so busy. Sometimes we forget. We've had issues with people warming up their vehicles in their attached garage with the door closed. We've had people coming home from work 3 o'clock in the morning. They go into the garage, they shut the garage door, they go in and they forget to shut their car off. So it's so important to have those carbon monoxide detectors. Absolutely. And it's the same thing with those batteries. You need to change every year as well.
Now, before we let you go here, let's talk a bit about fire extinguishers for a home. There are different types for, grease fires, for electrical fires. What's the best type of fire extinguisher that people can have in their house?
People need to have an ABC extinguisher. Now, a Class A fire is just your ordinary combustibles, wood, paper, anything like that. A Class B is a fuel or flammable liquid fire, and a Class C is an electrical fire. There is a Class K extinguisher out there that is used for kitchen grease fires, but it's not It's not a grease fire at home. It's a grease fire in a restaurant that works in conjunction with the suppression system that's already in the restaurant over the deep fryers. Even if you deep fry every day at home, you don't need it. What people need to remember is an ABC extinguisher will put out all those types of fires. What's in an ABC extinguisher is baking soda. So if someone doesn't have one, or even if they do, maybe have a couple boxes of baking soda around as well. And when you're cooking, have a lid beside you. It's not attended. If all of a sudden it comes and catches on fire, you can either grab the extinguisher or just cover it with the lid, shut the burner off and move it off the burner. But so important. And one last thing I'd like you to say about cooking, where a lot of times we have, if you ever do have a fire inside your oven or inside your microwave, don't panic, just hit the power button. Don't open the door. If you open the door, that rush of oxygen is going to make that fire get even bigger. If you leave the door closed and just hit the power button, there's not enough oxygen there to support the combustion, and that fire will go out in seconds. You're going to have to give your oven or your microwave a good clean, but at least your house is still standing and nothing is spread.
Troy Hicks, Fire Prevention Officer with the City of Lethbridge Fire Department. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks again for having me, Hal. I really appreciate it.
You bet. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.